Now, when Vox is telling its readers that the Supreme Court can overturn Trump's conviction, here's the article right here. When a very respected publication among liberal Democrats is telling its readers that the conviction might have constitutional issues, you better believe there's a huge, huge constitutional crisis pertaining to this guilty verdict. Hit subscribe to this channel. You'll get to hear legal scholars right now. You'll also hear a legal scholar talk about the Facebook post that could completely derail the conviction as well. There are Sixth Amendment issues at play. Trump was not convicted of a federal crime that the federal government leveled against him. A state cannot level a federal charge at a citizen. The DOJ and the FEC both dropped the hush money case, yet New York took it upon itself to convict Trump of FEC and DOJ crimes. This is not possible in our system of government. State and federal laws are different. The federal government has to level a federal statute, has to indict Trump on a federal statute, and there was no federal statute that he was indicted upon. That's a Sixth Amendment issue. We'll get to that in a second. Hit subscribe to this channel. Let's get started, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for watching. To my super chat, thank you. This is Greg Jarrett talking about the fact that the Supreme Court will get involved. Federal courts have to get involved. They will overturn this unconstitutional guilty verdict, just like the 9-0 unanimous Supreme Court decision overturning the Colorado ban. A state cannot influence the entire country, whether it's the Colorado ban or this conviction. That's why it's blatantly unconstitutional. This is even more overt than the Colorado ban being unconstitutional. It's overtly flawed, and it'll be overturned. Hit subscribe.
Country know it's a hoax. They know it's a hoax. They get it. You know, they're really smart, and it's really something. So we're going to be appealing this scam. We're going to be appealing it on many different things. He wouldn't allow us to have witnesses. He wouldn't allow us to talk. He wouldn't allow us to do anything. The judge was a tyrant.
That was former President Trump vowing to appeal his conviction following his unprecedented trial in New York.
Sentencing is now scheduled for July 11th, just days before the Republican National Convention. So how long will the legal battle last, and how will it impact Trump's campaign?
Fox News legal analyst Greg Jarrett joins us now. Greg, you've been helping us through this process. Confusing. I still don't understand what the charges are or how it was concocted, but we'll leave that for another day.
Nobody understands what the charges are. There were no federal charges that he was convicted on. There's no federal statute within the sentencing. There's a New York Penal Code statutes pertaining to the record-keeping violation, but these are misdemeanors. The felony, they became felonies because of a federal statute that's non-existent. That's a Sixth Amendment issue for the Supreme Court, in addition to other issues.
What does happen next? How in the world does this play out in an appeals context?
Well, the word speedy, Pete, is not in the vocabulary of the New York Court of Appeals. I mean, you can't even file an appeal until after the sentencing, as you point out, July 11th. Even then, I mean, the next level appellate division is really a rubber stamp for Judge Juan Merchan. Same thing with the highest court, which means that Trump's only real relief in this case can be found in the federal courts, because those judges.
His only real chance is in the Supreme Court and federal courts. And I don't think federal courts, the Supreme Court, has to happen before July 11th.
Judges, who are a lot smarter, actually care about the right to a fair trial. And in this case, it's littered with reversible errors by Judge Merchan, especially due process violations, refusing to tell the defendant what this secondary conspiracy crime is. That ignores Trump's Sixth Amendment right. And then telling the jury, don't worry about unanimity on which of the three possible uncharged crimes.
There are violations of Trump's Sixth Amendment. He was convicted of an imaginary, invisible federal statute, We do not know what he was convicted on. This is blatant, ladies and gentlemen. And that's why you should hit subscribe to this channel. And I mean, it's just a matter of time. Trump is not going to, this conviction will be overturned. It will almost certainly be overturned by the Supreme Court. I cannot give you a date. I can tell you it will be overturned either by the appeals court in New York or by the Supreme Court. I think the Supreme Court, 100% it'll be overturned. I don't know when. There's a slight chance after November 5th. I think 70, 80% chance before November 5th. I think 40 to 60% chance before July 11th.
That are a predicate to your verdict. I mean, that is so shocking, such a bedrock constitutional right. But the legal theory itself was ludicrous. As you say, nobody really knows what they decided other than the verdict, an expired misdemeanor that comes to life thanks to an unidentified felony over which Alvin Bragg has no authority to enforce. As I said in a column, this was an Alice in Wonderland case with a Mad Hatter judge.
Yeah.
Greg, let me ask you two quick questions if I could. You point out his only real relief would come in the federal system, no chance in the state system, you would assume, in New York. But even in the appellate system, Greg, I would be very skeptical he'd find relief in the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. It really wouldn't come, I would think, before the Supreme Court of the United States. Unless he gets relief at the Supreme Court, I can't see where it will come.
Yeah, I think he has a pretty good chance in the lower appellate federal courts. But you're right. Well, ultimately, this could go to the U.S. Supreme Court. I think they would look very dimly at the actions of Judge Juan Merchan. Fair trial and a venue of his peers. That didn't happen here. And as I pointed out, these due process rights are so important, and they were so egregiously violated. I can't see this case surviving judicial scrutiny in the federal courts.
It's interesting. The White House is already trying to lay the groundwork for somehow you're un-American, or maybe it's even taboo.
Each of the justices, I think, have already decided to overturn. So it's just a done deal. It's just a matter of when it gets to the Supreme Court. There's no discussion. There's no debate. It's blatantly unconstitutional. So you have everyone talking about this right now. You have articles every single day talking about the Supreme Court, where liberal publications are preparing wonderful, morally superior liberal Democrats for the eventuality that it gets overturned. The whole thing, this entire thing is an unconstitutional attempt at just getting Trump because Democrats actually did commit crimes. So if Trump committed a crime, then he should be, convicted. If Democrats commit crimes, they should be convicted. The problem is that Trump didn't commit a crime, yet he was convicted of complete nonsense, and it was completely unconstitutional, and Democrats don't care, while at the same time, they cover up actual criminal behavior. 50 intel officials come out of nowhere and try to convince the American public to interfere and influence 4 years ago during a presidential contest. So where's their convictions by the New York courts? But they lied. They said Hunter's laptop was a Kremlin plot. As always, every criminal activity from Democrats is a Kremlin plot to inform you of how corrupt Democrats are. There's bribery and graft schemes within that laptop. Clinton had servers with top secret and special access program intelligence illegally transferred onto them. It's impossible from a cybersecurity perspective to do so. So Democrats have committed crimes. Biden's special counsel stated he committed crimes, but he's elderly and had cognitive issues, so they wouldn't indict him. So there's a two-tier. Obviously, there's a double standard. But this is not, it's a done deal in terms of it being overturned. Now it's just a matter of getting it to the Supreme Court.
to say anything about how this was unfair. They kind of want to make it like the same way it was with the last election, where, you know, you're an insurrectionist if you suggest that things were not on the up and up. I find that very interesting. But I think the number one question that I've been getting from other people, they seem to think I know the answer. I don't. So I'm going to ask you, which is there a chance that Donald Trump will be either on house arrest or put in jail? I heard David Axelrod.
They want to jail Trump. I think that it's almost certain they're going to try desperately to get Trump and the Secret Service in a jail facility, an entire level of a jail. It wouldn't be just one cell. God forbid that takes place. I think that would be a complete travesty, because you have Democrats actually committing crimes, and then they can say, oh, look, we don't commit any crimes. Look, Trump's in jail. This is the warped, twisted, really stupid public relations stunt. It's only helping Trump. Trump will win in a landslide on November 5th. So be here on November 5th. He'll win in a landslide. He'll do very, very well. The problem, however, is that Democrats have had this temper tantrum since 2015, and they are not going to allow business as usual. They are going to try to find every way to tarnish the American political system. This is just one example. They want to jail him. And so July 11th is the sentencing. The Supreme Court must get involved before July 11th.
Talking about this on Bill Maher's show as well. What do you think?
No, I don't think so. First of all, it's almost automatic that you get a stay of any sentence pending an appeal. But in this particular case, it is the lowest level felony. It was actually one crime that they decided to count stack by multiplying the number of invoices and vouchers in the case. That kind of count stacking, no honest, ethical prosecutor would ever do it. No judge who was fair or competent would have allowed it, which, excludes Juan Marchand. As to your other point, Biden and the Biden administration saying you can't criticize this decision. This coming from a president who, more than any other president, has trampled on the rights of free speech.
They would say that Trump was an authoritarian despot out to devour democracy if he had convicted them of actual crimes. Hunter's laptop is linked to Joe. Joe is the big man who gets 10% of deals according to emails in the laptop. And it's not difficult to prove they're pay-to-play schemes. You have people testifying in Congress that already stated they're pay-to-play schemes. So it's not difficult to convict. It's just that almost virtually the entire American media establishment essentially works for the Democratic Party. So when they cheated Bernie Sanders in a completely in a theatrical performance called the DNC primary, every major publication said, no, it was fair. No, it was wonderful. Then the Democratic chairwoman, Schultz, dropped out and resigned in disgrace. Okay, so it was never fair. But if you listen to media, oh my God, it was so fair. Nothing was more equitable and fair than the DNC primary. And so they do this. They in 2015, 2016, we crossed the Rubicon into Orwellian world. Trump, they say, is the master of deceit. He lies all the time, but they actually lie all the time. Trump doesn't. He engages in hyperbolic speech. Big deal. Every president does. They hyperventilate over every example of hyperbole from Trump. And then Biden talks about inflation, talks about things he did in his life, blatant lies, and they ignore it. So anyway, let's continue.
And has shredded the First Amendment. Remember, this is, Biden was the guy behind the censorship on social media. Of course, I have a right, and everybody else has a right to say this case was rigged. It was preordained. It was not fair. And I don't care how much Joe Biden complains about that. The Constitution protects us in our criticism of this case and this judge.
Yeah.
All right, great.
Nicholas, thank you so very much. And I think there will be many investigations. He'll get an attorney general this time that will actually be like Merrick Garland. So he has to actually get a Merrick Garland. Could you imagine Merrick Garland on the Supreme Court? This is the man they wanted on the Supreme Court. Could you imagine that, ladies and gentlemen? So you have Merrick Garland going after Biden's political rivals vehemently, but media, late night, there's a public relations monstrosity protecting Democrats. But I think, Nicholas, there will be many, many investigations, a great many investigations, and also trials as well, pertaining to the wonderful, morally superior Democrats. Here's Hans A. von Spakovsky, FEC chairman. One of the main reasons the Supreme Court will overturn the unconstitutional guilty verdict. There's no federal.
Hans von Spakovsky is a senior legal fellow at Heritage Foundation and a former Department of Justice official under President George W. Bush. He believes Cohen did not violate campaign finance laws, and neither did the president. He joins me now. Hans, this is a really hot article. Rudy's been forwarding it. The president's been waving it around in the air. I've been talking about it on the 5 all week. I claim all the credit. Besides you, of course, for writing it. In simple terms, because we're going to be talking about this probably for the next 2 years, was this payment to Stormy Daniels illegal before the election? You say the Federal Election Commission, the Federal Election Campaign Act would say no, it's perfectly legal.
Yeah, and the reason is this. You can't use campaign funds to pay personal or business expenses. You can only use campaign funds to pay campaign-related expenses.
Right.
And the FEC has said in the past that this kind of a payment, a hush money payment, that's a personal expense. That's not related to your campaign.
And it was actually paid for by Trump, not the campaign.
No, that's right. And the reason we know that the FEC would not consider this to be a campaign-related expense, and that's important because if it's not, then all the rules and regulations in federal law don't apply. But remember, the Justice Department tried to actually make this same argument once before when they prosecuted or tried to prosecute John Edwards.
Right.
Their actual contributors were making payments to his mistress who was working for the campaign.
Right.
A jury didn't buy it, but the FEC also didn't. They audited the Edwards campaign and said, these are not campaign-related expenses.
Right. Now, so let's just put this into perspective now. If you're in Congress, and we know Congress...
So these are not what the hush money, even if Trump paid with his own pocketbook, was not an FEC crime. That's why the FEC dropped the case. The Steele dossier was a violation of FEC laws. That's why the FEC fined the Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee. Okay, so Trump was never fined. The Democrats were.
They run for re-election every 2 years. I mean, it's in the window of a campaign, of course. Millions of dollars is going out. That's taxpayer money. That's not being reported on FEC filings. So what's the difference?
No. No, in fact, if you take to the extreme this weird theory that the U.S. Attorney in New York has, all these members of Congress are using taxpayer funds to pay for campaign-related expenses, which I think is very problematic.
I mean, if you just give that argument right there, it's game over. I just don't see how people, because everybody on the left is saying, oh, you know what? He pled to a campaign finance violation. That's it. The president's now on the hook, and let's impeach. You're saying you don't see any evidence in the case histories and these acts. I mean, you have codes here you cite, and I want everybody to read this article by Hans. Trump's ex-lawyer didn't violate campaign finance laws, and neither did the president.
There are no federal codes or statutes that Trump broke within the guilty verdict. Go and find one, ladies and gentlemen. There is none. I can't believe the entire country isn't talking about this. There's no federal code or statute or regulation that's listed within Trump's guilty verdict. That's a Sixth Amendment issue, but that's also just blatantly unconstitutional. A state cannot level a federal charge. The Department of Justice must level a federal charge.
It's all over the internet. You can't even spend money. I mean, what if you got a haircut before the election? I mean, out of your personal wallet. I mean, is that a campaign expense if you don't report it?
Well, look, under that theory, it is. I mean, I'll give you another quick example. Look, if you don't pay the mortgage payments on your house and a bank forecloses in the middle of your campaign, obviously that's going to hurt your reputation and may influence the outcome of the election. But that's still not a campaign-related expense. That's something you have to pay out of your own funds. You can't use campaign money to do it. And by the way, if, in fact, a candidate were to use campaign funds to pay off, for example, a mistress, I can guarantee you that FEC would be going after them saying, you use campaign funds for personal expenses.
Right. All right, Hans, there it is.
So he didn't use campaign funds. He paid with his, Michael Cohen paid with his own money. And under cross-examination by Congressman Greg Steube, in Congress in 2018, Michael Cohen stated there was no evidence, no recording of Trump telling him to do anything. Then, of course, they found a recording. So, I mean, the man lies. It's like Democrats lie all the time. Then they hyperventilate about Trump lying when Trump tells the truth. If he was more diplomatic, it would be better from a political sense. But this is a very interesting take on Newsmax about the latest Facebook post that could have already derailed the guilty verdict even before the Supreme Court.
In the criminal trial against President Trump, apparently a juror alerted a relative, his cousin, about the verdict a day before the verdict was delivered. And then that cousin of the juror posted on Facebook that Trump was going to be found guilty. It's unclear as to how this could possibly impact the ongoing legal proceedings. Judge Juan Merchan notified Trump's attorney, Todd Blanche. What do you think about this? Is this a big deal?
Lydia, this is a huge deal. I've been saying this from the beginning. This was a rigged trial from the beginning, and now we're going to see it was rigged all the way to the end. We need more information about this juror to make sure that there is a relationship, or if this was just some random troll on the internet. I would tend to believe this is not random. There is a relationship. That judge would not have sent notice to Todd Blanche, former President Trump's attorney, if there wasn't more evidence or something that was troubling. This needs to be a mistrial immediately. This judge is now going to be on the hook, and every single person is going to be watching, because we know in jury instructions, you're supposed to be very particular about the evidence that you're talking about, and that stays within the jury room.
Wow, that's incredible. Mehek, also, I want to stay on another case.
So in addition to all the constitutional issues, the Sixth Amendment violations of Trump's rights, Sixth Amendment rights, he doesn't even know what he's being charged of. There's an imaginary federal statute that doesn't exist or that they just made up, and New York cannot level a federal statute at Trump. The DOJ must level the statute. Then there's the issue about that Facebook post. And if indeed the individual that made the post right before, a day before, a couple days before the guilty verdict, if they're related to somebody on the jury, that could dismantle everything. And it could be just overturned just by virtue of they didn't sequester the jury. The jury, they weren't sent to a hotel away from media and any influences. So that is a big deal. If there was bias, if there was, if there was political motivation, that influenced the jury, it could be overturned or, dismantled. The verdict could be tossed aside, tossed away, done away with tomorrow. But let's go ahead and listen really quickly to Bradley Smith. There's no campaign finance issue here. They got Trump on something he didn't do. Whereas with Hunter's laptop full of bribery and graft schemes, according to the New York Post and Daily Mail, I mean, the foundation they had a uranium deal that, I mean, Democrats will defend forever. Could you imagine if Trump presided over these things, where millions of dollars go into a Democratic foundation, and then President Obama doesn't veto the sale from the same people, to the same people who gave money to the foundation run by Bill and Hillary? I mean, it's really just, imagine if Trump presided over all of these scandals. He would have already been in prison for years now. But anyway, hit subscribe if you're new. Let's continue with Bradley Smith. There's no federal law that Trump.
So Trump's indictment looks like a perversion of campaign finance laws. There are no crimes committed, or at least that's what Bradley Smith, Capital University law professor, chairman, and founder of the Institute for Free Speech. Mr. Smith is a former FEC commissioner, and he's the co-author of Voting Rights and Election Law. Brad, you're writing in the Wall Street Journal. We've been trying to get our paws on you for the show. Thank you for coming on. You're saying there was no crime.
My pleasure.
There was no crime to start with. Even if there were some issues on the so-called filing of business papers, there was still no crime.
Right. I've had a bit more time. I had the commercial break to look at the indictment a bit more. And it looks like the last couple pages of the indictment do intend to say that the crime was not disclosing campaign contributions, although they never cite a specific government statute. But here's the problem here. The prosecutor.
They never cite a specific government statute.
Prosecutor's theory goes like this. Federal law says it's a campaign contribution to make an expenditure for the purpose of influencing a federal election. Those are the key words, for the purpose of influencing. And he says, well, these payments were intended to keep her quiet, which would help the campaign, so they were for the purpose of influencing the campaign. Now, first, these payments could have been made for other reasons, right? To prevent embarrassment to his family, to preserve marital harmony, all kinds of things. But none of that really matters, because the standard here for the purpose of influencing is not a subjective standard. It's an objective one. So if I go out and I want to pay for TV ads that say, you know, Donald Trump is a ding-dong daddy from Dumas Bay, because I think that's really going to help him win re-election, it doesn't matter. Legally, that will not be for the purpose of influencing an election, no matter what my own subjective purpose was, right? It's subjective. So what counts as campaign expenditures? Things like, you don't hire a campaign manager unless you're running for office. Right. You don't take out ads saying vote for me unless you're running for office. You don't hire or establish field offices unless you're running for office. But other things you do. For example, you buy clothes whether you're running for office or not. So the fact that I'm running for office and I say I've got to look good, and I go out and I buy a $6,000 suit that I would never otherwise buy, doesn't make it a campaign expenditure. It doesn't count. Same if I say I need a $600 haircut. Or to take a more perhaps relevant example, suppose I'm a business owner and I say I'm going to run for office, and I go to my corporate lawyer and I say there's some lawsuits against our corporation. I think they're bogus, but let's get rid of them so they don't interfere with my run. Just settle those lawsuits. You can't settle those with campaign funds. It's not a campaign expense, even though that person's subjective purpose was to influence the campaign.
By the way,
so that's a very important part of the law.
I know. I was very impressed with the $6,000 suit. That must have been a custom, bespoke suit. In your op-ed piece, it was $4,000. But I know we've had an inflation problem in the last couple of weeks. But your point here, I'm just having some fun. But your point here, Brad, if I understand it, is that you buy a suit, you get a nice haircut, whatever. You're doing it directly for the campaign. Is that correct? That's the point you're making. But if you want to
the point is, yeah.
If you want to defend yourself, your honor, keep it away from your wife, that kind of thing, which, by the way, is unproven. I mean, Stormy Daniels keeps telling people she didn't have an affair. Nobody wants to listen to her, but that's perhaps grist for another segment. But if that does not qualify because it's not directly for the campaign. Is that right? Is that my correct interpretation?
It actually goes further than that. Even though you bought that suit because you were running for office and want it to look good, it's still not a campaign expenditure.
Oh.
Why? Because you buy clothes. You buy clothes whether you're running for office or not, right? And so anything that people might do, even if they're not running for office, doesn't count. So people pay money. For example, they pay divorce attorneys to try to seal up their divorce records so that those don't become an embarrassment of the campaign.
Right.
Their purpose may be to influence the campaign, but it's an expenditure that somebody who wasn't running for office might also make. The only things that count are things that come directly out of the fact that you're campaigning. And the flip side of this is that it's actually illegal to convert your campaign funds then to personal use. So it's actually illegal to use your campaign funds to buy that suit. It's illegal to use your campaign funds to pay a lawyer to seal your divorce records because you think that will help your campaign.
The Democrats used campaign donations from Bernie Sanders, for example, to purchase the Steele dossier. That's why they were fined by the FEC. Trump was not fined by the FEC, did not commit an FEC crime, yet of course he was convicted of an FEC crime.
And this is the real problem you have here. Not only is there, I think, not a campaign finance violation, this underlying alleged violation, but it's a situation where they're going to get Trump coming or going. Because I think, knowing Bragg, and you've set the political stage very well, had Trump paid for this with campaign funds, I think we can feel pretty certain that he would be being charged today with having illegally converted his campaign funds to personal use. In other words, they were going to get him coming or going. If he pays for it with campaign funds, they were going to say it was illegal personal use. If he doesn't pay this money with campaign funds, which was the reality, now they say, oh, well, he should have used campaign funds. And that's, you know, the antithesis of the rule of law, where you set up a system where no matter what course of action a person takes, they're going to be held in violation of the law.
Well, I mean, but how does that get up to the Federal Election Commission?
Ladies and gentlemen, this is why you watch these live streams. Is it, so interesting and fascinating and breathtaking? And I mean, I find it absolutely riveting, but a person just tuning in might say, well, what's the big deal about these live streams? How come his channel's growing, and how come there are 1,000 people every live stream? Listen to this. I humbly ask everybody, and God bless you all for watching. Listen to this listen to this right now. This is exactly why you watch these live streams and my channel and hit subscribe. This is exactly why it'll be overturned in the Supreme Court. This is exactly why it was unconstitutional. The state of New York, the state of Colorado, none of the 50 states have any right to level a federal crime against anyone without the DOJ or federal government involved.
Which has already turned this case down once.
Right. Well, this raises yet another question. Can, of course, a state prosecutor prosecute an alleged, quote, federal crime that the Federal Election Commission and the Department of Justice have already decided not to prosecute? We might think about it.
Let's listen to that again. It's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. This is exactly why. And anyone who thinks that Trump is guilty and that's it needs to listen to the following words.
Already turned this case down once.
Right. Well, this raises yet another question. Can, of course, a state prosecutor prosecute an alleged, quote, federal crime that the Federal Election Commission and the Department of Justice have already decided not to prosecute? We might think about it this way. Imagine if New York just passed a law saying it is a violation of the New York Penal Code to violate any federal law. And then we'll decide what federal law is violated, right? That would subvert the entire federal state structure of law. I mean, that would allow state DAs to start prosecuting anything they think is a violation of federal law, even though the federal courts or federal administrative agencies or the Department of Justice had felt it was not a violation of federal law. So it's really getting into sort of wacky legal theories, but also I think very dangerous theories. Again, if we think about the rule of law, I don't think this can be emphasized enough that if Trump had paid for these with campaign funds, which the DA says he had to have done, I think they'd probably be chasing him today for illegal conversion of campaign funds to pay this personal expense.
We don't know that.
So there you have it. It's not a campaign finance issue. It never was. It was never a campaign finance issue. Ever. Never. And so that's why you have publications talking about the Supreme Court. Let's go ahead right here and listen to Hans A. von Spakovsky again. He's a FEC chairman. Bradley Smith was an FEC chairman. They state categorically. And Democrats say, well, it's the FEC laws have been interpreted this way. Even that is categorically false, patently false. But even if they wanted to convince themselves of that, Hans A. von Spakovsky, Bradley Smith, and the FEC itself refute that absurd claim. The opposite is true. What Trump did was never viewed as a campaign finance issue.
A member of the Federal Election Commission, Hans von Spakovsky, agrees with the president, and he joins us now. Hans, thanks so much for being here.
Sure, thanks for having me.
Set this up for our viewers. What is this campaign finance law, and why do you say Donald Trump did not violate it?
It's called the Federal Election Campaign Act, and it governs the raising of money and the spending of money for all federal campaigns. That's anyone running for Congress or the presidency. Mr. Cohen pleaded guilty to a supposed violation of that law because of payments that were made, I guess you could call them hush money payments, to two women who were claiming that they had had affairs with the president. The problem with his guilty plea is that those payments aren't covered by the law. The only way these kind of expenses are covered under the law is if they are campaign. And these expenses, this is a potential personal liability of the president, and you actually can't use campaign funds, money that you've raised from campaign contributors, to pay for something like that.
So Trump did the right thing. He did not use campaign funds, which is why the FEC fined Clinton and the DNC for purchasing the Steele dossier, a compilation full of lies and gossip and deceit, categorically false statements that even Michael Cohen was suing BuzzFeed for, with campaign funds. Okay? That's why they were fined by the FEC. Trump was not.
You had mentioned and quoted Federal Election Commission Chairman Brad Smith, who said that these payments to women were unseemly, but they're not necessarily illegal.
Yeah, and that's the key thing for people to keep in mind here. We're talking about what is an actual violation of federal law. And this is not something that the Federal Election Commission, and that's the independent agency that is supposed to enforce this law on a civil basis, and that's where I used to serve as a commissioner, it does not consider that these kind of payments are related to a campaign. Therefore, the rules and regulations don't apply to how that kind of a payment is made.
Do any of Michael Cohen's or the president's actions, Hans, constitute a civil offense?
No, I don't think they do, and they certainly don't constitute a criminal offense. Why? Well, because under the law, to prove a criminal violation of the campaign finance law, you have to prove that it was a knowing and willful violation. You can't prove that when you have former FEC commissioners saying it's not a violation of the law. You have the FEC saying it's not a violation of the law. That raises great doubts about it, and so how can anyone be found to have willfully and knowingly violated the law?
Michael Cohen, he says that this was done to sway the election, so doesn't that make it campaign related, Hans?
No, it doesn't, and here's why. There's another provision of the law, and this is something that the U.S. Attorney in New York is essentially ignoring. There's another provision of the law that says that an expenditure or an expense is not campaign related if it's an expense that would exist whether or not you're running for office. And that's why this is not a campaign expense. This is the kind of claim that celebrities of all kinds get fairly often, and it was not dependent on the president running for office. Yeah, it might.
He would have paid, any celebrity pays hush money with or without running, almost always without running for a campaign, 99% of the time without running for a president or office. So it's not a campaign expense. And if you look at the verdict and the trial papers, they do not list a federal statute. This is huge, people. This is immediate. The Supreme Court, it's not a matter of if they overturn it. They will. It's a matter of when they get it. That's all. That's why these are important live streams, because it's already overturned in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court will overturn this. It could even be unanimous, like the Colorado verdict. There's literally no federal statute that he was convicted on. And so it's just a matter now of when it gets to the Supreme Court. That's all.
Might affect his reputation, necessarily make it a campaign-related expense under the applicable statute.
Hans, one last question for you. If this case, and I hope I'm not getting you to step outside of your lane too much, but if this case isn't based on campaign finance violations, what's the case that prosecutors you believe have here?
Well, remember, this was only one of 4 offenses that Cohen pleaded guilty to. The more serious charges were tax evasion, and financial fraud in applications that he submitted to a bank. You know, he also pleaded guilty to lying to Congress. But the real offense here, the one that was most serious, was tax evasion. And that's why he was facing potentially a lot of time in jail.
So Michael Cohen turned on Trump because he actually committed crimes himself. There you go. The entire obsession that Democrats have with Trump consists of people who committed crimes on their own, whether it was committed crimes on their own like Michael Cohen or, signed a non-disclosure agreement like Stormy. These things have nothing to do with Trump. Yet they found some way to embroil Trump in controversy because they themselves actually committed crimes. I would not vote for Trump if he had a laptop full of bribery and graft. Democrats would. They don't care. They do not care at all. They voted for Clinton, and the foundation was essentially a conduit for pay-to-play schemes. They don't care. Biden, our current president, mashed potato brains, you can see that there's respectfully, I say this with the utmost respect, obvious issues from a cognitive sense. And I don't believe me, the special counsel stated something like a well-meaning elderly man with cognitive issues. A court would not convict. So Democrats live in their own world. They get the benefit of every doubt. They get prosecutors who don't want to indict or convict them. They have prosecutorial discretion. They never get indicted for actual crimes. They go after Trump because they know that they've committed crimes. So what better public relations stunt than to just pretend that Trump is the big villain, and people eat it up. See, the problem, though, is that the economy stinks. Inflation, interest rates. We're on the brink of a major stock market crash. So, anyway, ladies and gentlemen, hit subscribe to this channel. I will be back at 10 p.m. Eastern. Thank you so very, very much. The Supreme Court essentially has already ruled on this. The 9-0 overturning of the Colorado ban was precedent to overturn this absurd conviction.